In the heart of a remote African village, nestled between dense forests and winding rivers, life moved with a rhythm as old as the land itself. The village, built from clay and thatched roofs, stood as a testament to generations of tradition and custom, where social hierarchies were sharply defined and respect for elders and lineage governed every interaction. Paths between huts were well-trodden, yet whispers carried faster than footsteps, especially when tales of strength, cunning, or misfortune were involved. Among the villagers there existed an unspoken understanding that some individuals, despite their youth or appearance, carried an aura that set them apart, and in this village one young girl embodied that quiet distinction. She was only 16, slight of frame but firm in posture, with eyes that mirrored both curiosity and unwavering resolve. While other children laughed carelessly or obeyed instructions without question, she observed everything, learning the patterns of people, the unspoken rules of the village, and the subtle movements of nature around her. Her quiet strength had become evident from a young age, and though she spoke little, her presence commanded attention. Those who had known her since birth recognized that she possessed an innate determination, a capacity to endure hardship without complaint, and a clarity of thought that often left elders nodding in approval. Yet, it was her composure under pressure, the calm manner in which she faced challenges, that drew both admiration and envy from those around her. The village was not without its tensions. Hierarchies were rigid, and individuals who dared to shine too brightly were often met with suspicion or resentment. Among her peers, several had watched her grow with eyes that combined admiration with unease, for they sensed that her abilities, whether in skill, intelligence, or the quiet charisma that made her stand out, could disrupt the balance they had long taken for granted. Whispers followed her as she walked through the central square or carried water from the river, subtle murmurs of jealousy and fear mingling with praise. Adults in the village, while outwardly approving of her diligence and courage, also speculated in hushed tones about the strength she might wield when provoked, or the way she seemed to navigate danger without hesitation. In their superstitious minds, resilience and survival were often linked to mystical forces, and her composure suggested a connection to something deeper than mere human fortitude. The villagers held strong beliefs surrounding endurance, courage, and the ability to survive against odds. Tales of ancestors who had faced impossible challenges, storms, and adversaries circulated at firesides, and the young girl had grown hearing these stories, internalizing their lessons. Survival was more than instinct. It was a virtue, a mark of one who carried the strength of the lineage in their very blood. The girl's reputation as someone quietly powerful and perceptive had begun to intertwine with these superstitions, making her both revered and feared. Her very existence challenged expectations. She did not flaunt her abilities, yet they were evident to anyone watching closely. Her steady gaze, the confident way she carried herself, and her calm reactions to minor hardships marked her as someone destined to endure far beyond what others might imagine. By the riverbank, where children learned to fish and women washed cloths, she often lingered in thought, observing the patterns of water, the whispers of the wind, and the subtle signs of the land's moods. Even in play, she demonstrated an uncanny awareness of her surroundings and a composure that belied her age. Villagers who watched her could sense that she was not ordinary. She was marked by resilience, foresight, and a strength that had yet to be fully revealed. The young girl's quiet confidence, coupled with the village's reverence for endurance and superstition regarding survival, set the stage for the events to come. Her presence promised change, her character hinted at greatness, and her community could neither ignore nor underestimate the remarkable force she would become. In the shadows of the village, not all eyes that watched the young girl carried admiration or respect. Among her peers and even within her extended family, there were those whose hearts were heavy with envy, whose minds twisted her strength into a threat. These rivals observed her every movement, noting the way her confidence drew attention, how elders nodded in quiet approval at her insight, and how the whispers of admiration often lingered longer for her than for anyone else. Their envy had grown over months and years, festering silently until it ripened into something dangerous. What began as passive resentment evolved into active plotting, a calculated scheme meant to suppress her rising influence and assert dominance over her destiny. The conspirators met in secret, under the cover of dense trees at the edge of the village or in the small hidden spaces behind storerooms where the walls were thick and ears could not hear. Their discussions were low and urgent, filled with speculation about the girl's abilities and the potential she represented. "She must be stopped," one whispered, voice quivering with a mixture of fear and desire. "If she continues, she will surpass all of us. She will decide who holds power in this village." The others nodded, eyes gleaming with a shared conviction, each fueled by personal motives. For some it was pure jealousy. The girl's skill, intellect and resilience highlighted their own shortcomings. For others, fear had taken root. The fear that her potential might challenge their control, disrupt the carefully balanced hierarchies they had grown comfortable in, and expose their own weaknesses. The plan they devised was both cruel and cunning. Rather than confront her directly, they intended to leave her in a place where survival seemed impossible, a trial masked as punishment. The details were exacting. She would be taken to the dense forest that bordered the village, left in a secluded area where predators prowled and the elements could easily overpower a lone girl. No one would witness her struggle. No one would intervene. Their intent was simple yet terrifying: to ensure she would not return, to eliminate her without overt violence that might implicate them. Each conspirator contributed to the plan, choosing roles that would facilitate the execution. Someone to lure her from the village, another to create distraction, and yet another to ensure her provisions, or lack thereof, would make survival nearly impossible. As they worked through the logistics, tension grew among the group. The proximity of the girl's family made secrecy essential. Whispers of doubt occasionally surfaced. What if she escaped? What if she proved stronger than they imagined? Yet these fears only sharpened their resolve. The very qualities they feared in her, resilience, intelligence, and composure, became the reasons they insisted on the plan's perfection. They meticulously chose the time, the location, and the method, rehearsing the steps until each felt confident that there would be no chance of failure. Every glance they exchanged was tinged with urgency and unspoken anticipation, aware that their reputations, authority, and even safety could be compromised if she survived and their plot were discovered. Even as preparations progressed, there were subtle signs of the girl's intuition at work. She had noticed moments of unusual whispers, furtive glances, and strange hesitations in those around her. Though her suspicions were not fully formed, they planted seeds of caution in her mind. Meanwhile, the conspirators, consumed by their fear and envy, failed to recognize that the very qualities they sought to suppress, the girl's determination and resilience, would become her greatest weapons. Their meticulous planning, meant to ensure her demise, set the stage for an unexpected turn. A trial that would not only test her survival but reveal the full extent of her extraordinary strength. The forest loomed ahead, dark and unwelcoming, as the conspirators led her through twisting paths and thick underbrush. She had trusted them, or at least believed that family and neighbors would not betray her outright, but the truth soon became unbearable. When they reached a secluded clearing where the trees formed a natural barrier from the village, they halted. The ground was uneven and littered with jagged stones, and the shadows of branches swayed like restless spirits. At that moment she realized the depth of their deception. Their eyes, which had once been familiar and warm, were now cold, calculating, and devoid of sympathy. In an instant, their cruel plan became undeniable. She was weakened from the day's chores, carrying burdens both physical and emotional, and now they left her to face the forest alone. One conspirator whispered something about her being too much for this world, while another simply turned away as if their presence had been nothing more than a necessary duty. There was no protest, no hesitation, just a chilling certainty that she would be left behind, and they would walk away unburdened by conscience. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound could, a sharp reminder that trust was fragile and that the envy and fear of others could manifest in the most dangerous ways. Fear surged through her chest, a heavy, constricting presence that threatened to overwhelm her. She sank to the ground briefly, her fingers brushing the rough earth, as disbelief and despair mingled with the creeping shadow of panic. How could they abandon her like this? Had they truly believed she would not survive? Each rustle of leaves sounded like a predator's whisper, every snapping twig underfoot a reminder of her isolation. The sun dipped lower, casting the clearing in long, ominous shadows that seemed to stretch toward her like accusatory fingers. For a moment, the world felt impossibly vast and she felt impossibly small. Yet beneath the fear, a flicker of determination sparked. Despite the betrayal, despite the aching exhaustion in her limbs and the terror clawing at her mind, she refused to surrender. Her thoughts sharpened, recalling lessons learned from her family, her ancestors, and the quiet strength she had always carried within. The forest, though menacing, was no longer merely a place of danger. It was a crucible. She could either succumb or rise, and even in this moment of profound abandonment, her resolve began to take shape. Meanwhile, the conspirators departed without a backward glance. Their expressions betrayed satisfaction, relief, and a hint of triumph as they returned to the village, certain that their plan had succeeded. Some muttered about the girl's supposed fragility, others laughed quietly at the thought of her demise. The villagers who caught glimpses of the departing figures were left with uneasy questions and whispers of what had truly transpired. But in the clearing, alone and bruised, she breathed deeply, letting the chill air fill her lungs. Fear was present, but it was no longer the master. Determination had begun to assert itself. Even abandoned, she felt the stirrings of a power that would soon grow far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Alone in the clearing, her body ached from bruises, scrapes, and exhaustion, but it was the weight of betrayal that pressed heaviest upon her chest. She sank against the rough bark of a tree, letting the cool shadow provide what little comfort it could. Every heartbeat reminded her of the precariousness of her situation, but within that rhythm, memories began to surface. Memories of lessons whispered by her mother and father, of stories told by elders about resilience, courage, and the indomitable spirit. Each recollection acted as a small ember against the cold, threatening darkness. She remembered the morning her mother had lifted her small hands and said, "Strength is not only in the body but in the heart. When the world pushes you down, rise with purpose even if no one is watching." Her father's words too echoed in her mind, "Fear is a test, child. Not every challenge can be seen, some must be felt. Your task is to endure, to understand, and to find the path through the storm." These teachings had been folded into the fabric of her being over the years, but only now did their weight truly manifest. She realized that the betrayal, while cruel, could not strip her of what had been quietly instilled within her. As the night deepened and shadows lengthened, she traced the moments when she had faced small hardships and emerged stronger, moments when she had fallen but learned to rise with a steadier step, when others had doubted her abilities, and she had proved them wrong through quiet persistence. Each memory strengthened her resolve, knitting together a mental armor against the fear and despair threatening to consume her. Her thoughts sharpened with clarity. This was not the end, only a trial, and she would meet it not with weakness but with unflinching determination. Within her, a dialogue unfolded, one of inner counsel and courage. "You have survived before," she told herself. "You can survive now. The forest is vast, the night is long, but you are stronger than they know. They left you thinking they could break you, but strength does not come from their mercy. It comes from your will, your mind, and your heart." She repeated these affirmations quietly, letting each word root itself deeper into her consciousness. The pain of her body seemed to lessen under the weight of this newfound focus. Despair transformed into strategy. She examined the surroundings, the trees, the uneven earth, the faint tracks of animals or wind-swept debris, learning, observing, calculating. The stars above flickered, faint yet unwavering, mirroring the flicker within her own spirit. Each breath she drew reinforced her understanding that survival required more than instinct. It demanded insight, patience, and the courage to act despite fear. In this private struggle, as she nurtured the embers of her resolve, the girl began to feel a shift within herself. The betrayal of others, the cruelty of being abandoned, would not define her. Instead, it would mark the beginning of her emergence into strength far greater than anyone in the village, or beyond, had ever anticipated. As the night deepened and the moon cast its pale silver light across the forest clearing, the girl felt something stir within her, an energy she had never consciously known, yet had always sensed in fleeting moments of instinct or intuition. At first it was subtle, a warmth in her chest, a pulse that seemed to sync with the rhythm of the forest itself, a heightened awareness of the wind brushing through leaves, the distant cry of an animal, or the faint scent of damp earth carried by a gentle breeze. She realized with growing astonishment that her senses were sharper than ever, as if the betrayal and abandonment had unlocked something dormant inside her. Pain that had once been sharp and overwhelming now receded as though she could will it away, her body responding with a speed and resilience that defied logic. Cuts and bruises ached less. Exhaustion seemed to ease as if her muscles were being silently mended. She flexed her fingers and toes experimentally, amazed by the strength coursing through her limbs. The forest no longer seemed a hostile place but a stage on which her newfound energy could reveal itself. Each movement felt imbued with precision and purpose, as though she were learning her body's capabilities in a way she never had before. Her mind, too, became clearer and more focused. Thoughts that had once been tangled with fear and confusion now sharpened into strategy and insight. She noted every sound, every shadow, every shift of the wind, calculating possible paths to safety and imagining contingencies for every potential threat. It was as though the forest itself responded to her heightened perception, guiding her subtly through cues that had once gone unnoticed. Her courage, once tentative and cautious, blossomed into a quiet fearlessness. Danger no longer paralyzed her. It became a measure of her ability to adapt and endure, a reflection of the growing power within. Even more astonishing were the subtle hints of something otherworldly. Shadows around her seemed to bend slightly toward her presence. The leaves rustled in patterns that mimicked the cadence of her breath, and faint glimmers of light appeared where the moon's rays touched the underbrush. These were not mere tricks of perception, for the changes were consistent, persistent, and undeniably linked to her awareness. She lifted her hand and felt a pulse of energy, almost tangible, extending outward as if the very forest acknowledged her will. Her heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with exhilaration, and she realized that the strength she felt was as much spiritual as it was physical. As she tested her abilities, small demonstrations of power emerged. A fallen branch lifted slightly under her gaze, aligning itself neatly against the base of a tree. Water from a nearby stream swirled gently in response to her movements, though she had made no contact. Even the nocturnal animals, typically skittish, seemed to regard her presence with curiosity rather than fear, their movements slowing as if in recognition of something greater than mere survival instinct. She understood then that her endurance, courage, and latent energy were intertwined, forming a force that was as much mystical as it was natural. Her transformation was not instantaneous but a gradual awakening. Every breath she drew, every cautious step she took, reinforced the understanding that she had become more than the ordinary girl the villagers had underestimated. Her spirit radiated confidence, a quiet command that demanded attention, even in the stillness of the night. She began to visualize her path forward, imagining how she would return to the village and confront the conspirators, knowing that she would do so with a power that none could ignore. By the time the first hints of dawn tinged the sky, she felt entirely renewed, her body agile, her mind sharp, and her spirit luminous with a strength that no betrayal could diminish. The forest had tested her, the night had challenged her, and yet, through the crucible of abandonment, she had discovered a force that would ensure she not only survived but rose stronger than anyone could have feared. Her journey from vulnerability to power had begun, and even the shadows seemed to bend in silent acknowledgement of her emergence. The first rays of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in streaks of gold and amber. The girl stirred, muscles stiff and joints aching, yet something inside her urged movement. She rose cautiously, testing her weight on legs that had been bruised and battered, feeling the lingering soreness ease with each careful step. Every motion was deliberate, every breath measured, yet she marveled at how her body, guided by the latent power she had discovered, responded with a resilience that seemed almost unnatural. Pain was present, yes, but it no longer dictated her limits. With determination hardening her resolve, she began to move, one trembling step at a time, toward the path that might lead her back to safety or civilization. The forest, once a source of fear and uncertainty, now appeared transformed in her perception. The leaves shimmered with dew, reflecting the sunlight like tiny mirrors, and the bird songs seemed to punctuate her journey with encouragement. She noted every detail, the curve of the river, the patterns of light filtering through the trees, and the subtle tracks left by animals and humans alike. These observations guided her carefully, ensuring she did not stumble upon hidden dangers or lose her way in the maze of undergrowth. Even the scent of the earth, damp and fertile, seemed to provide direction, a gentle pull toward areas she instinctively understood might lead to habitation or refuge. Her mind was as active as her body. While navigating the forest, she replayed the betrayal and cruelty that had left her stranded, not with bitterness but with clarity. She understood that those who had abandoned her, the jealous rivals, the envious peers, and even certain family members, remained unaware of the transformation that had taken place within her. They believed that the forest, darkness, and distance would be her undoing. They assumed she would succumb to exhaustion, exposure, or fear before she ever reached the safety of the village or any familiar path. Their ignorance of her resilience fueled her determination to continue, transforming the treacherous journey into a testament of her emerging strength. As she progressed, small signs of her abilities continued to manifest. A twisted root that might have tripped a normal traveler seemed to yield under her careful step. Branches that could have scratched or snagged her clothing subtly shifted, guiding her forward. Even distant calls of animals, the rustle of leaves, or the movement of small creatures hinted at an almost imperceptible energy aligning with her will. Each success, each careful negotiation with the obstacles before her, reinforced a sense of empowerment. The forest no longer held only danger. It became a proving ground, a stage upon which she could refine her newfound abilities while steadily moving toward her goal. Hours passed, yet she did not falter. Hunger and exhaustion whispered at the edges of her awareness, yet her body seemed to anticipate the path, guiding her with uncanny intuition. Every step reminded her of the strength that had been dormant, now awakened, and the lessons of patience, resilience, and inner resolve were embodied in every careful movement. She paused occasionally to rest, drawing in deep breaths of forest air, listening to the distant sounds of streams and birds, reminding herself that each sound, each ripple of nature, was a compass pointing toward life and survival. Meanwhile, back in the village, the conspirators went about their daily routines with the certainty that their plan had succeeded. They spoke of her demise as though it were already confirmed, mocking the idea that she might somehow endure the trial they had set. Yet, unbeknownst to them, the very ordeal they had intended to end her life had awakened a force within her that no one could ignore. The girl's steps, though slow and cautious, carried with them a quiet promise. She would return not as the vulnerable child they had abandoned, but as someone whose power, resolve, and presence would challenge every expectation they held. By midday, she reached a small clearing near the river, familiar enough to know she was nearing the outskirts of the forest. The sunlight bathed her face and she could feel her energy fully restored, her body moving with a grace and precision she had never known before. Every scar, every bruise, every trembling step had become part of the journey that forged her resilience. The forest, once a prison, had been the crucible in which her strength had been honed, and as she approached the edge of civilization, she knew one truth with absolute certainty: she would rise stronger than anyone had ever feared, and those who had doubted her would soon witness the force they had attempted to destroy. Back in the village, whispers began circulating like wildfire. It started subtly, a fleeting glimpse of movement near the forest edge, the sound of someone traversing paths that should have been empty. The conspirators, once confident in the finality of their plan, began to exchange uneasy glances. At first, they dismissed the signs, telling themselves the girl could not have survived. Yet the small anomalies continued. Broken branches where none should have been, footprints that seemed too purposeful for an animal, and faint echoes of her voice carried on the wind. Doubt crept into their minds, unwelcome but undeniable, and with doubt came fear. As the sun climbed higher, the atmosphere among the rivals shifted. Fear was no longer theoretical, it took root in the pit of their stomachs. They began to remember her resilience, the quiet strength she had shown even in the smallest challenges. What had seemed like ordinary determination now appeared extraordinary, a force that could not be contained by cruelty or deception. One of the conspirators muttered under his breath, "What if she lives? What if she has become stronger than we imagined?" His words, though whispered, carried the weight of panic, and soon others began to share similar fears, each revelation compounding the tension that hung thickly over the village. The first tangible signs that her strength had changed the game became undeniable. The forest seemed to vibrate with her presence even from a distance. Animals, typically wary of human intrusion, behaved unusually, watching silently as though acknowledging someone of power. Objects previously displaced by her passage now appeared deliberately arranged, almost as if the forest itself was guiding her path. Even the wind carried a sense of intent, rustling through the leaves in patterns that hinted at her movement. The rivals, attuned to every detail through paranoia, began noticing these subtle cues. The girl's survival was no longer a simple act of endurance. It was a demonstration of something beyond natural limits. Fear manifested not only in their hearts but in their behavior. They spoke in hurried, fragmented sentences, trying to convince themselves and each other that these signs were coincidence, that the girl could not possibly have gained power from mere survival. But their eyes betrayed them. Each rustle of the trees, each snap of a twig, sent shivers of apprehension through the group. The villagers who were not directly involved in the plot began noticing the rivals' unease, whispering to one another about the possibility that the girl was alive and that she had changed in ways no one could have predicted. By evening, the seeds of panic had fully taken hold. The conspirators began to second-guess every plan they had made, every act of cruelty they had committed. They realized that the girl's endurance, her ability to navigate the forest, and her mysterious resilience could no longer be dismissed as luck or coincidence. The power she had discovered in solitude, the latent energy that had carried her through pain, fear, and betrayal, was beginning to ripple outward, reaching the village long before she had returned. The first tremors of fear in their hearts were the opening notes of a reckoning they had never imagined. The girl they had tried to destroy was not only alive but rising stronger than anyone had dared to fear. By the time the sun reached its peak, the village was alive with tension, though no one could yet see the source. Rumors of her survival had spread like wildfire, but the conspirators clung desperately to hope that she had perished, leaving their guilt and fear unchecked. Then suddenly, a figure emerged from the treeline at the edge of the village. a silhouette that radiated strength, purpose, and unyielding resolve. The girl stepped forward, each movement deliberate and confident, the earlier fear replaced by a quiet, commanding presence that drew the attention of every villager. Her eyes, once full of uncertainty, now glimmered with determination, reflecting a resilience forged in the crucible of abandonment. She walked through the village square without hesitation, her gaze fixed firmly on those who had betrayed her. The conspirators, initially frozen in disbelief, could barely comprehend the transformation before them. Gone was the frail, quiet girl they had left to die. In her place stood someone whose aura suggested mastery over both her body and spirit. The villagers, sensing the shift in energy, gathered instinctively, whispers filling the air. Some stared in awe, others in fear, but all were captivated by the undeniable authority she radiated. Every step she took seemed to echo across the square, a testament to the power she had harnessed during her ordeal. When she finally reached the conspirators, she paused, letting her presence fill the space between them. There was no immediate display of aggression, no desperate plea for recognition. Instead, she allowed the silence to speak for itself, a silence so potent that even the most defiant among them felt its weight pressing upon their conscience. Her voice, when it finally broke, was calm, steady, and imbued with an authority that brooked no challenge. You believed I would break. You believed cruelty would diminish my spirit. You were wrong. The words resonated with the villagers, carrying the truth of her journey. The power of resilience cannot be dictated by malice or fear. The conspirators stammered, attempts at excuses or deflections faltering under the intensity of her gaze. They realized, perhaps too late, that they were no longer in control. Her presence, fortified by the mystical strength she had discovered, demanded acknowledgement and respect. The villagers could see for the first time that the girl had transformed not only physically but spiritually. She was a living embodiment of endurance, courage, and the latent force that had grown within her in the wilderness. Some murmured of awe, comparing her emergence to the legends of old, while others exchanged fearful glances, uncertain how to respond to someone who had risen so far beyond their expectations. As she addressed her rivals directly, subtle manifestations of her newfound abilities became apparent. A breeze stirred through the square, gentle yet insistent, and objects nearby seemed to shift slightly, aligning with her presence. It was as if the village itself acknowledged her authority, affirming the power she had cultivated in isolation. The conspirators recoiled, their eyes widening in disbelief as the evidence of her transformation became undeniable. They were confronted not only with her personal strength but with the tangible proof that their cruelty had been utterly powerless to suppress what they had feared most: her spirit. The villagers, once passive witnesses to injustice, now became participants in the reckoning. They observed her with a mixture of reverence and trepidation, recognizing that the girl they had once underestimated now stood as a symbol of hope, resilience, and righteous empowerment. Her stance, her calm composure, and the subtle display of energy that seemed to ripple through the air around her made it clear that she would not be silenced, intimidated, or controlled. Her return was not simply survival, it was a declaration that she had emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined, and those who had tried to destroy her would now face the consequences of underestimating the power of endurance and courage. The confrontation was brief, yet its impact was profound. Her presence reshaped the dynamics of the village in an instant. The conspirators were humbled, the villagers inspired, and the girl herself fully aware of the force she now commanded. The forest had tested her, betrayal had challenged her, and pain had sought to diminish her. Yet she had returned not broken but stronger, a living testament to the strength that lies within those who endure, rise, and claim their power, no matter the darkness they face. The moment the girl fully stepped into the village square, her presence was undeniable. It was not just her stance or the certainty in her movements that drew attention, but the subtle aura of strength that seemed to radiate from her very being. Every villager, from the eldest elder to the youngest child, felt the shift in energy, as if the earth itself acknowledged that something extraordinary had returned. She did not rush or shout, she simply moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the faces of those who had once plotted against her. With each careful step, it became apparent that she was no longer the fragile, underestimated girl they had left behind. The first demonstration of her hidden strength came quietly, yet it carried immense impact. A simple gesture, a hand extended toward a pile of scattered tools, caused them to arrange themselves neatly, aligned and upright. Murmurs rippled through the gathered villagers. The act was small, yet impossible to ignore. It was a subtle but unmistakable manifestation of control over forces that the villagers had never imagined she could command. The conspirators, whose confidence had been built on the assumption of her defeat, stiffened visibly. Their whispers of disbelief grew into muttered confessions of fear. They could no longer dismiss the transformation they were witnessing. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, and graceful, every step echoing a mastery over body and mind that seemed almost supernatural. She lifted her gaze toward those who had betrayed her, her voice calm but firm. "You thought cruelty could break me. You thought fear could bind me. You were wrong." Her words resonated through the square, each syllable carrying the weight of her journey, her suffering, and the strength she had cultivated in the night of abandonment. The villagers, who had once viewed her with quiet sympathy or indifference, now watched with awe, recognizing that survival alone could not account for the force they were witnessing. This was power honed in solitude, tested by pain and tempered by resilience. The girl's demonstration of strength was not limited to her words or gestures. The subtle environment around her seemed to respond to her presence, as though acknowledging the magnitude of her transformation. Objects shifted gently, shadows moved in harmony with her steps, and even the wind seemed to bend in rhythm to her movements. The villagers, many of whom were deeply superstitious, gasped at the display, their fear and reverence intermingling in a tangible tension. It became clear that the power she possessed was not merely physical endurance but a combination of spiritual resilience, inner focus, and an almost mystical awareness of her surroundings. The conspirators' fear deepened as they realized the futility of their previous actions. Every attempt they had made to diminish her had only contributed to the awakening of her strength. The girl had survived where they assumed she would fail. She had endured hardships meant to destroy her spirit, yet each trial had only amplified her capabilities. Their envy, once a shield for their cruelty, now became a mirror reflecting their own impotence. They had underestimated not just her willpower, but the extraordinary force that arose when determination, resilience, and latent ability converged. As the villagers observed, their perceptions began to shift. The girl's hidden strength became a symbol of hope and courage. Mothers whispered to their daughters, reminding them that true power often lies within and is revealed in the crucible of challenge. Elders, some of whom had enforced harsh customs, bowed their heads, acknowledging the lesson that the girl embodied. Cruelty and fear cannot control the heart and spirit of those destined for greatness. Even the conspirators, though humiliated and shaken, had to recognize the undeniable truth. Her survival and transformation had elevated her far beyond the reach of their envy or malice. By the end of the day, the girl had not only revealed her hidden strength but had reshaped the understanding of power within the village. Her presence inspired awe, demanded respect, and offered a living example of what it meant to rise above adversity. The conspirators, their failure laid bare, were forced to confront the consequences of their cruelty, while the villagers celebrated a hero whose journey from vulnerability to extraordinary strength would become legend. In every glance, every whisper, and every gesture, the truth was clear. She had emerged stronger than anyone could have feared, and nothing would ever diminish the force she had discovered within herself. In the days following her remarkable return, the village began to stir with reflection and quiet contemplation. The extraordinary events surrounding the girl's survival could not be ignored, and slowly the people started to reassess their long-held beliefs about strength, resilience, and the role of fear in enforcing order. Conversations once filled with gossip and suspicion turned toward discussions of courage and the limits of cruelty. Villagers who had previously accepted harsh punishments as tradition now questioned their validity, realizing that true power and leadership lay not in intimidation, but in nurturing respect and honoring inner strength. The elders, who had long upheld strict and often cruel customs, felt the weight of their past decisions. Their authority, once unquestioned, was challenged by the girl's example. They witnessed how fear could not suppress spirit, and how malice only served to awaken latent potential in those who endured it. Gradually they began to speak of reforms, acknowledging that cruelty as a measure of worth was both ineffective and unjust. Rituals designed to intimidate or punish were replaced with celebrations of skill, resilience, and bravery. Lessons were reoriented to encourage young villagers to cultivate inner strength rather than submit to fear. The villagers' respect for the girl spread quickly, reaching every corner of the community. Mothers and fathers used her story as an example for their children, emphasizing that courage, determination, and integrity were virtues to aspire to. Teachers incorporated her journey into local lessons, illustrating that overcoming adversity required more than physical endurance. It demanded wisdom, patience, and an unwavering spirit. Even the rivals who had once plotted against her now observed her with a mix of caution and admiration, understanding that strength rooted in experience and resilience commanded recognition far beyond superficial power or social influence. Communal life began to change as well. Where fear and suspicion had once governed interactions, trust and collaboration took root. Villagers worked together more willingly, supporting one another rather than seeking to dominate or belittle. Festivals and gatherings became opportunities to celebrate achievements, courage and perseverance rather than enforce conformity or subdue weakness. The girl's influence became a guiding principle, inspiring a cultural shift that emphasized the dignity of individuals, the honor in overcoming trials, and the value of respecting one another's unique abilities. By the end of the season, the transformation was unmistakable. The girl, once a silent figure who endured hardship and solitude, had become a living symbol of hope and empowerment. Her story reminded everyone that fear could be challenged, cruelty could be overcome, and inner strength could reshape not only personal destiny but the entire community. The village, once rigid and bound by outdated customs, embraced a new era, where courage was celebrated, resilience was nurtured, and every young villager could aspire to rise above adversity, knowing that they too could forge their path to greatness. The conspirators, once confident in their scheme, now faced the full weight of their failure. Their plan to leave the girl for dead had not only failed but had inadvertently amplified her strength and influence. Word of her miraculous survival and newfound power spread swiftly, and soon the village turned its eyes toward those who had attempted to harm her. Whispers of disgrace followed them wherever they went, and shame became an inescapable companion. Those who had once carried themselves with arrogance and authority now found themselves shrinking under the weight of public judgment, their every move observed with suspicion and quiet disapproval. Some of the rivals attempted to justify their actions, claiming it was merely tradition or that they had acted out of fear. Yet no explanation could erase the evidence of their cruelty or undo the transformation they had inadvertently set into motion. Others were confronted directly by the girl, who met them not with anger but with measured, calm authority. Her presence alone was a testament to resilience, and her composure forced the conspirators to confront the reality that their malice had only made her stronger. Every attempt to undermine her spirit had been met with the awakening of abilities and courage they could neither anticipate nor control. The village elders who had initially overlooked the girl's mistreatment, now took steps to ensure justice was served. Some conspirators were asked to perform acts of restitution, others faced temporary exile, and a few withdrew in shame, unable to face the consequences of their actions. Their downfall was not solely punitive, it was also a lesson for the entire community, a visible demonstration that cruelty and envy could never triumph over resilience and integrity. The villagers who had once been bystanders to injustice, now saw clearly the power of accountability and the importance of moral courage. Despite all this, the girl chose a path that further solidified her legacy. She showed mercy to some of the conspirators, offering guidance rather than vengeance, and wisdom rather than retribution. Her actions were deliberate, demonstrating that true strength lies not just in survival or power, but in the ability to rise above bitterness and fear. By offering this tempered compassion, she transformed potential resentment into respect, turning the narrative of her ordeal into one of empowerment and moral authority. In the end, the conspirators' fall only served to elevate her further. The story of her triumph over betrayal and cruelty became a touchstone for the village, illustrating that adversity could not only be endured but transformed into strength, wisdom, and influence. The girl's mercy, patience, and calculated response became part of the lesson that she imparted to the community, that inner power, when guided by conscience and courage, could reshape destiny and inspire others to rise above their limitations. Her legacy, now intertwined with the consequences faced by those who had sought her downfall, stood as a lasting reminder of the triumph of integrity, resilience, and enlightened strength. Years passed, yet the memory of the girl who had risen from betrayal and abandonment remained vivid in the hearts of the villagers. Her story, once whispered in awe and disbelief, grew into a legend celebrated across generations. Parents recounted her courage to their children at the hearth, teachers wove her journey into lessons of resilience, and elders cited her example when guiding the community through challenges. She became more than a person, she became a symbol of survival, strength, and the extraordinary potential hidden within those who refused to succumb to cruelty or fear. The girl's tale inspired a transformation in the attitudes of young villagers, especially girls who had once been taught to accept vulnerability as their fate. They now heard of someone who had endured pain, outlasted betrayal, and returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. They learned that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to rise despite it. Each story of her triumph reminded them that resilience was a choice, a force that could be nurtured even in the darkest of times. Festivals that once celebrated tradition and obedience began to include tributes to her bravery. Children would perform dances or recite verses recounting her endurance, celebrating the spirit of persistence that she had embodied. Her legacy extended beyond admiration. It shaped behavior, attitudes, and community values. Villagers began to approach challenges with the knowledge that adversity was not a measure of weakness but an opportunity to discover hidden strength. Acts of kindness, courage, and perseverance were lauded, while cruelty and malice lost their grip on social approval. Even the rivals and conspirators, though their actions remained part of the cautionary tales, became examples of the consequences of envy and cruelty. Through their downfall, the community internalized the principle that integrity and courage are more powerful than intimidation or malice. The girl herself, now older and wise, remained a guiding presence in the village, though she rarely sought attention. She walked among the people with quiet dignity, her experiences lending her a calm authority that inspired respect rather than fear. Young villagers approached her with questions, seeking advice on courage, resilience, and leadership. Her responses were always measured, grounded in the lessons she had learned through hardship, that adversity could be endured, that betrayal could be overcome, and that the human spirit could rise stronger when tempered by challenges. Her actions, just as much as her words, became living teachings, shaping the moral compass of the community. During annual festivals, her story was recounted as a central theme, not merely as a tale of survival but as a celebration of empowerment. Songs and dances depicted her journey from vulnerability to strength, from despair to triumph. Elders emphasized the virtues she embodied: courage, wisdom, resilience, and the ability to rise above injustice. The story served as both inspiration and guidance, reminding the village that even in the face of betrayal or cruelty, there exists the potential for transformation and greatness. Generations later, the legend of the rising girl continued to influence the village's identity. She became more than a historical figure. She became an ideal, a standard of what it meant to face life's trials with courage and dignity. Her tale reminded everyone that true strength is discovered in moments of adversity, that survival is an act of defiance against cruelty, and that resilience can inspire entire communities. In every recounting, her story carried the same message: those who endure, rise, and claim their power can leave a legacy that shines far beyond the constraints of time, becoming a beacon of hope, courage, and unshakable spirit for generations yet to come.